Hey guys, let's get straight to the point. In the past 2 months or so, I've been filming with the A7IV on the street, capturing different footage to test out the ability of or the capability of the camera. I noticed one really strange things that no one really mentioned. The highlights on the Sony A7IV clips really early. Around IRE 85 or 85 IRE when you are filming at the native ISO, which is 800 and 3200. If you're filming outside of the native ISOs, the dual ISOs, your highlights are going to clip even faster at around 75 IRE. This is something that no one mentioned to me when I was looking at like review videos, even Jared Undone, he didn't mention about it. And a lot of people, they show the dynamic range and they didn't mention that the highlights are going to be clipped very early on. Compared to the A7S III, the A7S III has a much higher highlights tolerance. I have proof by looking at the test charts from Cine, so I'll show you guys that later. But I'll show you a real life kind of test why I found out that the IRE or the highlights are going to be clipped at around 85 or 89 to 90 IRE on the A7IV. That is really important because that means you will be having to preserve your highlight much more careful compared to other cameras, or at least compared to the A7S III. And that's why a lot of people are saying that you should not overexpose SLOG3 that much on the A7IV compared to the A7S III and other cameras. That is because the highlights are going to be clipped. That's why, and they didn't really talk about that. They just say like, don't overexpose it, just go like plus 0.3 or plus 0.7 or plus 1 when you look at the meter, which is not that useful because it's just measuring your general exposure of the whole scene. That's why they don't overexpose SLOG3 on the new A7IV. On A7S III, you can overexpose it and you can still recover the highlights, but on the A7IV, it's much easier to clip the highlights. I'm just going to show you some clips that I recorded using the A7IV, testing it with basically a lamp, and I will show you the screen that I captured on my phone, showing you the highlights that it's also clipping as well, or showing you guys the zebra that the highlights are being clipped. So let's take a look at the screen right here. I have a lamp set up basically in the middle of the screen, and at the bottom left of the screen, you will see that there is a recorded screen of my phone using the Monitor Plus app, and that one allows me to show you guys the zebra because I don't want to film the back of the screen and I don't have a Ninja 5 to record the screen. Anyway, this is how it looks like. And the first settings we have on the A7IV is at ISO 800, which is the native ISO. That will give you the highest dynamic range. Same thing with 3200 ISO. Everything is fine. You can see that I know the chart is kind of small at the bottom left of the recorded phone screen, but you can also see it here on the Final Cut Pro recorded screen. I'm just going to change it to histogram. Nope, not histogram. That is waveform, but I'm gonna use an overlay so you can see that if there's anything that it's gonna clip, this is the area, or this is the lamp. This is the phone screen. So ignore that part, focus on this part right here. You can see that everything is preserved, the highlights is preserved, the shadows are not being crushed on the screen right now, which is good. And that is at ISO 800. I'm gonna increase the brightness of the lamp. So you guys can take a look here. When I increase the brightness of the lamp, which is around right here, you can see that the RGB overlay waveform, it's moving up. But if you pay attention at the peak right here at around 85, 86, that's just the guideline that I set up for my own color grading purposes or exposure purposes. So watch and focus this part of the screen. If I start increasing the light more until you can see that on the phone screen, the recorded phone screen, that the highlights are being clipped at no, not clip, but it's showing zebra at IRE 85 because I set it to 85 IRE to show zebra. And at the same time, if I keep increasing the brightness of the lamp, you can tell that at the waveform, the peak of the waveform, it will never go past 85 or 86. Some other video editor, let's say DaVinci Resolve, it will show you 89-ish. So anyway, it's around that 85, 89-ish kind of level. It will never go up anymore because the information of the lamp it's missing. Basically, the highlights are being clipped. You will never be able to recover that because there's no information. You can tell by looking at the waveform that the information is missing. If I keep increasing the brightness, nothing is gonna show up in the middle of the lamp. Even if you try to recover it by pulling down the midtones, nothing is gonna come back. You can see that more and more part of the lamp, because the light bulb is in the middle, more and more part of the lamp it's basically being overexposed to a point that you cannot recover it. If I keep on going, I think this is the max brightness of the lamp. Almost the entire center part of the lamp is clipped or overexposed. I'm gonna show you even if I try to adjust the midtone of the lamp. Let's say if I want to recover whatever information that is in the middle, bring them back, by pulling this down, nothing is coming back. You can tell by looking at the waveform, this part is still clipped. Nothing, no details are being shown, even if you try to pull down the midtone, no matter how low you pull it down. So that's very, very important, because imagine that part of the image is something that is important. Let's say you want to expose for the outside, and you want to expose for someone's face, your talent's face. If that part is clipped, let's say some part of my face is being too bright, overexposed and clipped, you will never be able to recover it back, and that will just be like a bright patch on their faces. So that is super, super important. That's why I want to make this video, because no one actually talked about it. And one very important thing that you can do to avoid or to prevent this from happening is to set your zebra level to 80 or 85 maximum. So don't set your zebra to 90 or 95. It's not gonna help, because if you set it to 90 or 95, even when you're filming at the native ISO, you can see that it's not going over 85 or 89-ish IRE. So if you set it to 90 and you don't see any zebra, it doesn't mean that your highlights are not being clipped. If zebra starts showing up when you set the zebra level to 90 IRE or 95 IRE, that means it's way too late. So one thing that is really, really important to do is to set your zebra level correctly. If you're filming at ISO 800 or 3200, the two native ISOs, set your zebra level to 85. That's the max I would do. Once you see zebra, that means that part of the image is overexposed. It will not come back. So just tone it back down using ND filter, or change your aperture to fix that part to make sure that highlights are being preserved. And try not to use shutter speed, because it will mess up the emotion blur. And don't change your ISO to lower, because that will make the image even worse. I'm gonna show you right now. Let me reset this parameter. Whoops, just gonna take away that. The second image or footage that I recorded was recorded at 200 ISO. Let me find that first. So this is 200 ISO, and the camera is still capturing all the information because the lamp was really dim. But by the time I increase the brightness, watch and focus on this part, the waveform, the peak of the waveform monitor. Once I start increasing the brightness of the lamp, you'll see that the flat top shows up before 85. It shows up around 75, which is much worse than 85. That's why people are saying that film at native ISO 800 or 3200 on the A7IV. This applies to all the cameras, at least right now, all the cameras on the market. You should film at the native ISO because it will give you the most dynamic range. And no matter how hard I push, it's not going over 75 IRE because that's the top or the maximum brightness or IRE that the camera can handle outside of native ISO, 75 IRE. So this is much worse if you film at outside of the native ISO. Nothing is going to come back. You can see that the lamp is completely clipped. The center of the lamp is completely clipped. When I decrease the brightness, it will bring back the information, but nothing past 75 IRE outside of the native ISO. That's very, very important. So if you really have to film at ISO outside of 800 or 3200 on the A7IV, another suggestion is to set the second zebra level to 75 IRE or even 70 IRE just to be safe. So that's my recommendation. The last thing I want to show you guys is 3200 ISO. Same thing as 800, it will start clipping a little bit higher, 85 IRE, which is better than 75, but it's still not that great. Just for your information, I forgot to reset the IRE, or not the IRE. I forgot to reset the zebra level when I was testing the camera at 3200 ISO. So don't worry about when you see the zebra a little bit earlier. It doesn't mean that the image is clipping. So keep that in mind. I just forgot to reset it. It's my fault. So this is filming at 3200 ISO. When the lamp turns on, you can see that it's still okay by looking at the waveform, the peak of the waveform, that yeah, nothing is being clipped until around this level, which again, around 85, 86-ish IRE, the information is overexposed. Basically, the middle of the lamp is overexposed, everything is clipped at 85 IRE. So this is really important when you are filming, especially when you're filming outdoor. A lot of times people forget to preserve the highlight because they want to expose for the talent's face or whatever that you're filming and overexpose some stuff. Yes, that is the choice, but try your best to protect your highlights still, because the A7IV compared to other cameras, let's say the A7S III, I believe the shadow recovery is a little bit easier. I will show you right now. You can actually do this on your own camera. It doesn't have to be the A7IV or A7S III. You can do the exact same thing by going onto the internet and try to do a search for Sony D and type in your camera name. Basically, all I typed in was Sony D A7IV, and it will show you a lab test right here. The most important thing that I look at least for my purposes or projects, is this one right here. This is the dynamic range chart. One thing that finally confirmed my discovery, maybe I can call it this discovery, that the A7IV cannot, the highlights cannot pass 85 IRE or 80-ish, 90 IRE, is by looking at this dynamic range chart. You can see that the highlights is on the left. That's the brightest part of the image. Basically, it's under 90, which is, I think it's between 90 and 80. So 86, 7-ish, that's exactly what happened on the video that I just showed you. And at the bottom, we'll look at the shadows after we looked at the A7S III dynamic range chart. I'm gonna show you right now. This is A7S III's dynamic range chart from Sony D. I don't have the tools, they have the tools, I trust them. So, and it basically matches with what I found. Look at the highlights of A7S III. The range is much higher. You can see that it's between 100 to 90 to 100 IRE. So that means A7S III, when you use SLOG3 filming at the native ISO, which is 640, you will not clip your highlights that easily. You can kind of get to a really bright range. 95 compared to 85 is a lot. So that's why when you're filming in SLOG3 on the A7S III, you can kind of overexpose your image compared to A7IV. You can overexpose it, not that big of a deal. But if you go back to the A7IV chart, it's much lower. So that is really important, because once you clip the highlights, it will never be recoverable. So try not to do that. Try to make sure that you protect your highlights, because that will actually make your footage look not as professional, I would say, just not as good and not as pleasing. Let's compare the shadows between these two cameras since we have the dynamic range chart open. So this is A7IV. You can see that the shadows, it's basically when you get to IRE 20, the shadow level is still 9 on the A7IV, but when you look at IRE 20 on the A7S III chart, you can see that the shadow is at 8. Basically, that's the 8th stop on the camera. That means there's more information, I think. Don't quote me on that. I would try to prove it by doing more tests, like real life tests. But I see more stops here around 20 IRE on the A7IV, and I see less on the A7S III. Therefore, that's why you should overexpose A7S III, not A7IV as much, because there's more dynamic range on the A7IV by looking at the chart. Again, I will try to prove it by recording more footage on the A7IV, so definitely stay tuned for that. I hope this video will help you guys out when you are filming with the A7IV, wondering like, what should I do? How should I expose for A7IV's SLOG3? Why are people telling me not to overexpose it compared to SLOG3 on other cameras? This is why. If you overexpose it too much, it's not recoverable because your highlights are blown. Also, keep in mind, as I told you before, set your zebra level at 85 IRE if you are filming in SLOG3 and 800 ISO or 3200 ISO. If you're filming outside of those two native ISOs, set the zebra level to 75 or even 70 to make sure that you are not overexposing information on your image. That's it. That's just a quick video, not really a quick video, but that's just a video that I really want to make to help you guys, because I found this out and I was kind of panicking. I was like, is it because my camera was like defective or anything? Until I saw Sony D's dynamic range test that matches with what I found on the A7IV. So this is what I found out. If I have more information coming up in the future, I'll definitely make another video. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Are you facing the same issues or facing the same things? And if you have any kind of solution to fix this problem, or maybe you can do something to go around this limit, let me know in the comment section below as well. I hope this video is going to help you guys out when you are filming with the A7IV. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.